Why should we bother with what clients want from interpreters? They don't understand what we do, right? I'm Jonathan Downey and this is Inside Interpreting, and I just thought I would give you a quick insight into a video series that I'm looking at doing. Today I want to talk about client expectations, but in a way that you might not expect. Rather than telling you just what clients expect of interpreters, and here's a spoiler alert, we're still figuring that out, I want to explain why it's important to do research on that, and how we've been messing up slightly on that. Why do we need to know what clients expect of interpreters? Well, there's a couple of really basic reasons. The first is it's kind of arrogant to assume that as interpreters, we know better than the people who are hiring us. Actually, the fact that they're hiring us also makes their expectations important because they're hiring us. You know, it would be silly for a shop to say we don't care what our customers think of us. That's why so many shops are closing, because they took that attitude. We should be realizing that as interpreters, if we take that attitude to our clients, we might close down too. Simple enough. The other more complex reason is that whether they're accurate or not, whether they're reasonable or not, client expectations form the social context in which interpreters work. I don't know about you, but I've certainly had clients come up to me or come up to my colleagues at some point and correct wording because they use different words there. Or clients be shocked that we've done something that they weren't expecting, usually for the better. I even had one set of clients say, "Wow, you know our terminology, how come?" Whether we like it or not, whether we would want to know about it or not, client expectations form the basis upon which clients are judging our work and deciding whether to hire us again. I don't want to answer the question of whether those expectations are reasonable, but they're certainly valid. Whether we want them to be valid or not, they're valid because they're held by people who have a stake in the work that we do and in our ability to do work in the future. The problem is, though, is that if we attempt to study client expectations as if clients were themselves interpreters, we're heading for a fall. One of the biggest flaws in client expectations research since the late 1980s has been that the items used in surveys have been ones that interpreters understand, but that clients will never use. There's a study in the information box underneath this video by Mack and Cataruzza, which points out precisely this problem. Unless we know what criteria we're going to use, and unless we've checked that clients understand those criteria, we're basically talking to ourselves. And this explains why, for the most part, survey research on client expectations and even interview research on client expectations has been fairly unclear. The picture changed, however, with the work of two genius researchers from Turkey. First, Ebru Deriker, who has been on Inside Interpreting and interviewed. There's a link to the interview in the box underneath. Ebru Deriker pointed out that when you ask clients what they expect of interpreters, they'll say something like, "I want them to be faithful to what the speaker said," or "they need to say what the speaker said." When you ask them what that means, every single person gives you a completely different answer. So any marks or any importance that clients give to saying what the person said in surveys have to be taken with a grain of salt, because we don't actually know what that means. Then you have the work of her PhD student Şeyda Arslan, who's now an excellent researcher in her own right. Şeyda pointed out that actually, if you ask clients questions about interpreting in general, they give you answers that make it sound like they want interpreters to be robots and just to say what the speaker said without any interference or change or omissions or additions. They give you what I've called in Inside Interpreting videos before, the classic conduit model. Ask them how they want interpreters to behave at their event, and they give you something completely and utterly different that has nothing to do with the conduit model and sounds a lot like the idea of interpreters being partners. The expectations that we get back from clients are massively dependent on the questions that we ask and how we ask them. I have a paper coming out with Graham Turner, which is based on my PhD. Again, my PhD is linked in the box beneath as well. And we point out a new way of understanding client expectations. I don't want to give too much away until the paper comes out. When the paper comes out, yes, we'll be talking about that. But we point out that client expectations and stakeholder expectations, the expectations of anyone involved in the event, whether they're a client or not, they could be a speaker, they could be an audience member, they could be the person who commissioned it, they could be someone else who has a stake in the interpreting but who isn't technically a client. Those expectations, those wider expectations, are far more complex and affected by far more variables than we give them credit for, and it's when we understand those wider variables. For example, why the event is taking place, what pressure there are on the hosts or on the audience members or on the speakers, that we begin to get data which doesn't just tell us that clients expect us to be accurate, but tells us what's really going on and what our part of what's going on is going to be. And so client expectations are actually incredibly useful. As part of the wider world of stakeholder expectations, they define for us the social context in which the interpreters are going to work. A social context which is far more complex than we ever give it credit for. They give us the framework within which our interpreting is going to be judged, and yes, our interpreting is going to be judged one way or another. And they help us understand, as we get to know them better, the behaviours that will and will not be seen as appropriate in that context. But we can only understand client expectations when we stop expecting clients to think and behave and write and speak like interpreters. The only thing that we can do to understand the world in which we're working is to get out of interpreter land and into client land and understand that world much better. I'm Dr. Jonathan Downie. This is Inside Interpreting. Thank you very much.